started. All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I think we can go ahead and get started. My name is Jo Turcott. I am the Membership Engagement Specialist for NODA. I'm thrilled to have you all here. This is the pilot session, this author lunch and learn. This is pilot session for a new series that we are excited to bring to you throughout the year. And before we begin, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link in your inbox in the next day or two with that recording. If you have any questions, there will be a Q&A after each author presents. At the end of the session, I will drop that in the, I'm sorry, you can drop that in the chat. If at the end of the session, I'll share a short Qualtrics evaluation link. We'd love your feedback. So if you continue to, so we continue to shape programming that best supports your needs. If you would like more information about these authors coming to your campus or would like to secure books for your program, please email me and I will get you all set up with more information. I'd like to extend a very warm thank you to our partnering publishers today, Penguin Random House and W.W. Norton for making this session possible. All right, now I'd like to introduce our speakers and our moderator. Our first speaker up today is Adam Met, who has a PhD in Human Rights and Sustainable Development. Adam is a bassist for the multi-platinum band AJR, co-founder of the climate nonprofit Planet Reimagined, and professor at Columbia University. He'll share how fan-building strategies from the music industry can help us inspire action and rally support for causes we care about. We also have Greg Moen with us today, best-selling science writer and former Popular Science editor. He'll discuss Insights from the Heart and the Chip, co-authored by Daniela Rus, exploring how robotics and AI can enhance our lives. Ooh, let me get there. There we go. Sorry about that. Enhance our lives and help us reimagine a more human future alongside smart machines. We also have our wonderful moderator, Dr. Janine Ward-Roof, Vice President of Student Affairs at Fair State University and former NODA President, and longtime NODA volunteer and leader with Jay Cotter Book Reviews. So each speaker will have about 15 to 20 minutes, followed by a 10-minute to 15-minute Q&A moderated by Janine. And with that, I am thrilled to hand it over to our first author, Adam.
Thank you so much. I promise you that I'm the same person that's in the picture in the slide, even though my hair was 10 times as long as it is right now. And we'll probably go back to that slide in a moment there. Yes. So I am that same person, I promise you. I just took those photos, a handful of months before the book came out. And the book tour was so much on me that I just had to take off all of my hair. So in order to kind of give you a bit of an idea of my life, I'll tell you about literally the last week, and that'll give you an idea of how this book came about. So last Wednesday, I traveled to Texas to give a day's worth of lectures at UT Austin about movement building, about energy strategy. Then Friday, I did an event for TED where I worked with a bunch of different influencers on how to inject movement building language into their content without talking about anything political or polarizing. Saturday, I flew to LA because my band played the Hollywood Bowl, and it was the first time I'd ever been to the Hollywood Bowl, let alone played it, and it was an incredible experience. And then I flew back to New York because I started teaching my climate policy and campaigning class at Columbia. And that is the way my weird brain works. My brain goes from one thing to another, to another, to another. And being on tour as a musician for the last 18 years or so, every time we would do meet and greets, fans would come up to me and say, sure, I'll get a picture, but the thing that I want to talk to you about is I want to get involved in something. I want to be part of something bigger than myself. Can you tell me how to do that? And to be honest, we would meet, hundreds of people every night in 50, 60 cities across the US. And I was answering that question many, many times every single night. And I started to come to the conclusion that we needed something to help us understand how to do that. In big cities to small towns across America, we don't have those on-ramps to participate in the things that we care about, those kinds of big picture social movements, and the things that impact us on a hyper-local level. So this is why I wrote Amplify. Amplify is a deep look at the music industry and the entertainment industry and how both of these industries build fan bases because they are so good at it. They're so good at building fan bases that are really cohesive and diverse and interesting and have so many different parts to them. And then what I do is I take all of the strategies that the music industry is really good at and apply them to building better social movements. And again, even though I have worked on the center right with Republicans and I've worked on the far left with Democrats, this book is really it's for everybody across the political spectrum. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples of the way that the book kind of talks about these issues. Historically, and because I'm an academic at heart, I had to go through all of the research of how everyone has talked about the building of social movements and the building of fan bases. So historically, this metaphor has looked like a ladder. People have used this metaphor of a ladder to be able to talk about how people engage in things that they care about. So to give you an example in music, when you first hear a song in the supermarket, you're on the first rung of the ladder. You hear it and you're interested. You climb up another rung when you follow a band or an artist on social media. If you go to a show, buy merchandise, you go up and up and up this ladder, right? It makes logical sense. This is actually not the right model for 2025 because it assumes that people are joining these fan bases alone. And from COVID through today, the movement towards in real life and building these kinds of communities is taken precedent over joining fan bases alone. So we've developed this new model and kind of happened unconsciously over the course of us building our band. And now I've worked with a bunch of other artists and movements to use this new model. And this new model looks like a hurricane. So what we did was we brought our first fans really close to us, meaning we gave them early access to tickets. We gave them the music before anybody else. We gave them free merchandise. And then we turned them into evangelizers and sent them out into the world to bring other people into the center of this hurricane. So if you think about the shape of a hurricane, it's this big spiral, right? So even now, we're playing arenas across the United States and across the world. The new fans, we give them first access to something. We give them the things that make them feel special so they feel ownership over it. So then they go out into the world and bring new people in. So the whole book is based on this model of transitioning from the more academic way of thinking about building fan bases and building movements, which is this idea of a ladder, to this idea of a hurricane. And over the next couple of minutes, I'll give you a couple of examples that were kind of fun and interesting. One of them is the way that we use gamification. Now, gamification has been used by artists, musicians, fans, marketing agencies in order to get people excited about a brand. Taylor Swift uses this form of gamification called competition. Very obvious, makes a lot of sense. She puts fans in competition with each other to try and win prizes, get to things the fastest. Fine, great, obviously she's broken the internet multiple times, very successful. 21 Pilots is another band. They use a different type of gamification called world building. If any of you on here have played certain types of video games, this approach with each album, they create a larger and larger world through their videos, through storytelling, through the music, and they do these games where fans essentially have to solve puzzles within these worlds in order to learn more information about the band, about the music, about the world. We saw both of these models and we said, okay, what if we can use gamification in order to do something more interesting? So this is what we did. A couple of years ago, as we were putting out one of our albums, we hadn't released the track list yet. And what we did was we took the track list and divided it up into 36 jigsaw puzzle pieces and shot the puzzle pieces out across the internet. One piece to our fans on Twitter, one on Discord, one to our email list, our text list, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat. and we forced our fans to collaborate in order to make the track list. It took them about 3 hours to do this, and when they posted it online, that track list got more pickup than anything we had ever posted in the history of the band. Giving them the ownership over that project, over the track list, and over the album made them feel so important and so integral to the process that they wanted to share it, prove to other people how vital it was that they participated. And we had thousands of people post that image across the internet. That album got more pre-saves and more first week downloads than pretty much anything we'd ever done before. So, this idea of collaboration in gaming is something that we've applied to movements around the world. I've worked with everybody from the climate movement, because that's my area of specialty, but this book talks about everything from guns to immigration to healthcare. We even take lessons from people on the right. The book banning movement on the far right, I very much disagree with this movement, but they have used some strategies that have been really, really effective, and we need to actually recognize that. So as much as the kind of concrete and sticky stuff is important in the music industry, it's also really important in movement building. I'll tell you one more story. So the conservative talk show host Glenn Beck, and you might be surprised that I'm talking about Glenn Beck, because in terms of social issues, I disagree with him on 99% of things. However, Glenn Beck came to one of our shows, and our shows are relatively far to the left. Our lyrics talk about things like gay marriage. It talks about immigration, having a female president, and we even talk about quinoa in our music, which is the leftmost of all the grains. So if you think about it, Glenn Beck coming to our show was a surprise. He tweeted us after the show saying, I love AJR, I love the music, I love, their production, but most of all, I loved how they helped me connect to my son. And so I started to think about this. And so as I was writing this book, I said, what if I sat down with Glenn Beck and interviewed him about the idea of how to build a bigger tent? Because in music, we talk about building a fan base outside of our core fans. There are all these different levels of fans that we talk about. But how do we build a bigger tent? We do the same thing with movements. So I wrote to Glenn Beck, and I said, can I sit down with you? And he said, sure. So I sat down with him for 4 hours interviewing him for this book. And my goal, and he didn't know this, but my goal was to try and find one thing we could agree on, because I knew that I had disagreed with him on a lot. But the goal of this whole chapter in the book is to try and find things that you can agree on with people that you disagree with. So I spent 4 hours with him. I spent 4 hours talking about religion and family and all of these different issues that we disagreed on. And we talked about climate change, and he knew everything that I do to work on climate issues. And then, towards the end of the conversation, he wanted to prove how climate friendly he was, and he was telling me about his house that he has in the Intermountain West. And he said, Adam, you're going to be so happy. My house is completely clean, completely renewable. I have solar panels on the roof, and it runs on natural gas. And I said, Glenn, natural gas is not clean. And Glenn said, yes, it is. And I said, who told you that? And he said, everybody knows that. So I started to have a conversation with him about methane, which is the primary ingredient in natural gas, and how it's 87 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in warming the atmosphere. And he said, oh, you're just trying to steal my stove, right? And I said, no. I'm not trying to steal anything from you. One of the biggest problems for climate change is leaks in methane gas pipelines. Not anything that you're doing in your home, not anything with your stove or how you're powering your home, but literally as we're getting methane from place to place, there are leaks in all of these pipelines. And so I explained to him the business case for plugging these pipelines. And by the end of the conversation, he got on board with plugging leaks in methane pipelines, which would make a huge difference in the warming potential of methane. It's one of the big stopgaps we can do to prevent the immediate effects of climate change. So this idea of sitting down with somebody you so wildly disagree with, putting in the time and the energy and humanizing them to a point where you can find that one thing that you can agree on was so vital. This happens in music all the time. We bring in people who disagree with us on so many different things. We get hate online for our music like any other artist does. But at the same time, our concerts are a sacred space. It's a place where people can gather together, come together, and enjoy themselves. And Glenn Beck found that, and I wanted to find that with Glenn Beck on his turf. In the rest of the book, we talk about everything from good storytelling and effective storytelling. A good story is one that makes you want to tell your friends and family about it, but an effective story is one that makes you get up off your butt to do something about it. Music and the entertainment industry teach us about the difference between those all the time. Movements have so much to learn from it. But really, the core of the book in the first 2 chapters look at what are the things that I care about. Because the number one question, to go back to the beginning, that I get is I want to get involved in something. I don't know how to get involved, but also, what do I get involved in? So the first chapter helps people find that thing that they care about. And the second chapter helps people find the role they'll play in that movement. When I go to colleges across the country, I talk to a lot of students about climate and other issues. But I always get, oh, I'm studying pre-med, it has nothing to do with climate. I'm studying art, it has nothing to do with climate. Climate is everything. All of these things that kids are studying and students are studying around the country and around the world give them an opportunity to use that skill set to participate. I talk about the role of climate change in the health crisis, in healthcare. I talk about the role of art in helping to communicate. Every single person, I go around the room and talk about how each of the things that they're studying they can use to engage in a social issue that they care about. This book, Amplify, was meant not just to be read, but to literally be torn apart, to rip pages out, to write in it, to use it as a guide to help people participate in the things that they care about. Because more than ever, college students are, after they graduate from college, are looking for jobs where, yes, of course they can make money, but they can also make a difference. And they are struggling to find that thing that they care about, that way to make a difference. And when I was asked that question for the 5,000th time, I realized that I needed to write a book about it. So this is Amplify. There are a lot of other strategies in the book, really kind of creative, outside the box ways of thinking about this, but all rooted in academia. So thank you so much. I'll pause it there. I'm sure we'll have a couple of questions, but yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Met, thank you so much for joining us today. And I found your story about finding common ground inspiring. So thank you for sharing that. I do have a few questions that I was prepared to ask, and then I'm hoping that the folks who've joined us for the conversation today will put some questions in the chat as well. So we'll keep our eyes on that, and I'll share those as they come in. But since we're working with NODA and the premier organization that works with orientation, transition, and retention, I thought we could start with a kind of a level setting question around the work that we do. So those participating today mostly are from that OTR, orientation, transition, retention field in higher education, and they focus on access, transition, and really helping students persist and through campus to be able to complete their degrees. So would you take a moment and reflect on your transition to college and how orientation or retention programs help to assist you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my undergrad experience was a very weird one because, I mean, as I'm sure you can imagine with how my last week was, that's how my last bunch of years were and how my orientation was. I was so obsessed with school that my first semester I ended up taking 7 courses because I wanted to try everything. When I go out to a restaurant, I just hate getting my own dish. I always want to share with everybody else and get like a bento box style. So that was my beginning of my college experience. And the first semester was really rough, taking 7 classes. And I ended up working with my advisor, working with the team at Columbia where I went. And they really helped me to figure out how to navigate that. I stayed in 7 classes. I really did not do well in economics the first semester because I had to let one of the classes, go in order to focus on the other 6. But I ended up changing my major so many times, And I feel like that was pretty common for people in my school because they got so excited about so many different things. And to be able to get help to figure out the thing that I wanted to study, I ended up double majoring in philosophy and business. But I did study sustainable development. I got very close to the end of the degree, but I am not a chemistry person, and I needed to take 2 semesters of chemistry in order to finish it. So I ended up abandoning that major and doing business and philosophy in order to graduate. So the process of that and me kind of being all over the place, I needed that core, that team to help me get through it.
That's fantastic. I'm glad they were able to support you. That's often a difficult time for students as they're transitioning between their majors and trying to figure out what they want to do. We do have a question from Steve. And Steve says he's teaching with the book this semester, and it's going well with a lot of creative responses to the chapters and assignments.
Amazing.
And he had asked, they're on chapter 5 this week, and do you have any tips for getting often shy students excited about engagement outreach for their social movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. So chapter 5 is I just had to get the book so I can make sure I was saying what the right chapter name was. Chapter 5 is Hammers and Strings, and the idea behind this chapter is like the hammers and strings inside a piano, giving people a behind the scenes look is one of the ways to get them engaged in process. And having people engaged in process makes them much more excited about the outcomes. That's the 2-sentence version of the summary. Getting shy students to excited about engagement, outreach, or their social movement. So I think one of the most important things for shy students is to figure out in the social movement the thing that they care about the most and where they can contribute the most. When I teach, I always have students do a presentation, and inevitably there are 3 or 4 students who don't really want to do the presentation piece of it. So I always suggest that they do some other sort of creative project, whether they make a video or writing assignment and work with somebody else, if they write a speech. There are all of these different ways to participate in social movement building. Writing op-eds, doing like fake news interviews, writing speeches, things like that. And working with other students in order to get them to present the thing that they care about in the way that's best for them. Because not everybody is going to be the person who's leading, a march in the street. And I think we need to recognize that as we're teaching people about building social movements. So I really appreciate that you're teaching the book, and I hope the students are liking it.
And then Abigail writes, what is one piece of advice you have for students at the beginning of their college experience who are looking for their why?
Yeah, great question. So there's a kind of traditional way of thinking about how to get engaged, and it's what are the things that you love doing, what are the things that the world needs, and the third category of it is, what are the things that, and what are the things that kind of you have access to be able to participate in? I have a fourth category that isn't traditionally talked about, and this is, how can you make a difference really quickly? How can you have a quick win? And when kids and students are first starting out, I always make this recommendation. Sure, voting at the federal level is vitally important, but impact at your local level is, you can have thousands of times more power if you're working at the local level. To give you an example, in Texas, there was a community board meeting, a vote, last year. And one of the members of the community board won her seat by 12 votes, literally 12 votes. And that was the difference in them having a majority or a minority on the community board. And these community boards made decisions about transportation, about zoning, about waste, about food, about all of these things in the community. So one of the things about in looking for their why is, yes, those other 3 categories, but finding things where you can have quick wins, even if it's something as simple as getting a stop sign put up on your street and getting people to sign a petition. Having those concrete things, I think, are incredibly important to see if it's the thing that you really like doing. Because if you're going to work on something for 20 years, you better like what you're doing if you're going to spend that much time doing it. So why not try it out in a quick way first?
Thank you for that. Ashley writes, I really admire your commitment to engaging with people who hold vastly different opinions than you. What tips do you have for fostering community and collaboration in movement building in a world that is increasingly polarized?
Amazing question, and I talk about this almost every day. I had a fight with Al Gore about this, literally, last year. Al Gore says to me, Adam, I need your help building better advocacy strategies online to get people engaged, build community. And I said, no. I promise you, Al, in 18 months from last winter. I said 18 months from now, come back to me. We are going to see a trend of people moving away from the digital space and into IRL, into in real life. And we're already seeing that. With the rise of AI and distrust in what people are seeing online, the number of community groups, book clubs, running clubs has exploded, especially in small towns across America. We are seeing all of this happen in real life. So, to answer your question, the way to foster community is to bring people in person. And if we're talking about advocacy in the digital space more and more is being used as an off ramp to get people out of the digital space to bring them into real life. It is so much easier to foster that community and collaboration in real life. There's a sociological term that Durkheim wrote about in Elementary Forms of Religious Life called collective effervescence. Collective effervescence happens at a Taylor Swift show. It happens in church. It happens at sports games. It happens when people are all there for the same thing. It's that energy, it's that palpable thing that you can't really describe. And that happens when people are gathering in person, not when it happens digitally. At a Taylor Swift concert, most people don't know each other, but they're willing to hold hands and dance with each other. Same thing happens at church. That is how we build community effectively with this kind of move towards in real life.
Now, Chris said that the answer you just gave might hit some of this question as well, but I'll read the question nonetheless. You mentioned that ladder is an outdated model for building an audience or a movement that gave way to the hurricane model. What's on the horizon as the next method or movement that we may see on our campuses and communities?
Yes. So the IRL piece is huge. But the other thing is one thing that I mentioned before is the quick wins and local. We're seeing that more and more. I volunteered on a variety of different campaigns working with different organizations across the US. And we also did a major study with Ticketmaster about a year and a half ago. Ticketmaster sold 250 million tickets in the United States in 2024. That's more than they've ever sold before. They also just announced a massive investment in new venues because though they see this in real life piece. But this study we did with them, we sent a poll out to about 350,000 recent ticket purchasers from across the United States, across genres, ages, and we figured out this strategy for how to engage people when they're in the, I'm putting in quotes, the new town square, right? The idea of going to a concert or a sports event is the new town square. It's where people gather for these events. How do we turn those into a place for civic action? And so we figured out a way to do this by getting people to literally phone bank while they're in their seats at the concert, asking for specific policies to be passed, registering to vote, signing petitions. And again, we did all of this in an apolitical way. It was just about policies that are really focused on the local level, how it can impact them. I'll give you one example, but in Phoenix, we pulled into the venue and it was 109 degrees out, literally. And so the action we had on site was getting people to call their local leaders to ask them to unlock dollars for extreme heat because FEMA does not designate extreme heat as an emergency. So therefore, they weren't able to unlock dollars for it. Something really concrete, specific, impacting them directly. So this model of in person and in real life, this model of like collective action and this model of doing things that are hyper local is going to be what our prediction is for the next 5-8 years of action. That's what it's going to look like.
Fantastic. We have about a minute left. So is there one last thing that you want the participants to take away from with your book?
Sure. So I wrote this book because I really wanted to, and I almost felt like I wrote it because I have to, because there were so many people that were asking me these questions. Ultimately, should be participating in anything that I write about in this book unless they're having fun doing it. So many people think of movement building and advocacy and activism and all of these things to participate in. So many people think of them as a burden and just a responsibility. But the reason why I use the framing of this book, this fan building framing, is that being a fan ultimately is fun. It's voluntary. You don't have to do it. You go and have these experiences with other people because it's great and you enjoy yourself and you build community. And that's what we need to be doing, making that kind of engagement, that kind of advocacy, that kind of community building fun again, because we all sure as hell could use some more fun in our lives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Met. It's one thing to write a book, which is incredibly a difficult, I'm sure, and very hard project to do, where you have to spend a lot of time writing it, but it's also taking the time to be vulnerable about how you wrote. So we appreciate you doing that with us today and sharing more about the book and what you're hoping people get out of it. So we appreciate the time, and we look forward to hearing more about the book as it continues to rise in the ranks, I'm sure, as people look at it and use it. And certainly if people on this Lunch and Learn are interested, we'll share more information about how you can connect with this book and the publisher as well. So thank you again, Dr. Met. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Welcome. And now it is my extreme pleasure to also welcome our next author. So Greg Moen, and he is going to share a little bit about his book, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask some questions as well. So cue up your keys and get ready to type your questions into the chat when he gets done.
All right, hello everyone. That was really interesting, and this is fun because we do have such different books and different ideas, and so a really interesting mix of ideas here. So my name's Greg, or Gregory Moen, and first I want to tell you a little bit about the story behind this book, and then some of the ideas that are coming out of it. So first of all, you'll notice the chapter, I mean the subtitle here. So it's the heart and the chip, and then it's our bright future with robots. And the emphasis there is on the word bright, because most people think it's going to be a terrifying future. In fact, I just got a book in the mail the other day that I'm going to read, but it doesn't make me exactly excited to read it right now. If anyone builds it, everyone dies. It's about artificial intelligence and super intelligence, right? So it's frightening. So we have some very different futures sort of laid out in front of us. And this book is really, it's an optimistic vision, but a realistic one. So it's kind of, it doesn't mean it's the path forward. What we've tried to do is paint a picture of how this future with intelligent machines could work out well for everyone. And then also kind of what risks and potential problems we need to consider in advance. So before I get into the book, I'll tell you a little bit about the story behind it. So I'm actually a science writer. As was introduced in the beginning, I was an editor of Popular Science magazine, and I've been writing about robotics and artificial intelligence for 25 years now. And actually, way back almost 20 years ago, in 2006, I was asked to write a story for Popular Science about, where's our robot butler? Where's our Rosie the robot that can come in our house and do everything and take care of all our domestic chores? And so I went out and I talked to as many people as I could, as many experts. I visited labs all over the country. I talked to roboticists and engineers all over all over Europe and in Asia. And, one of the things you do as a journalist is, if you have someone interesting on the phone or in person, you always kind of ask, who else should I talk to about this subject, right? And the one name that kept popping up over and over again was this woman named Daniela Rus. Everybody said, oh, you got to talk to Daniela. You have to talk to Daniela. So I finally went and met with her, and at this point, she was already one of these MacArthur Genius Award winners, but that was like an early stage career thing. And within a couple of years, she would actually rise to become the first female director of MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab. But when I saw her, I went into the lab, And I immediately felt like I was in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but for robots. I mean, there were robotic flowers, robotic fish, robotic hands. There was the frame of a robotic car, but then there were also little tiny robotic flying cars that were inside a miniature city that were sort of envisioning a future where what if we actually had vehicles like this? There were little robotic blocks that could jump around and form new shapes, like stacking on top of each other. And the robots also weren't the kind of robots you think of in the movies where everything's like hard and metallic and you think of the old-fashioned robot dance. These were like soft and squishy robots and taking forms I'd never even imagined. So after I met with Daniela and talked to her, I put together this story, and the story that emerged was that, you know, we were wrong to think about one robotic butler or a Rosie the robot. In fact, what engineers and roboticists were really working on were very specific task-focused robots. So they were building machines that were good at one thing, right? Really, really good at one thing. And now, we tend, though, to think of, whenever we think of robots, we think of like the Terminator or C3PO or something like that, right? Or even if you're thinking of artificial intelligence, the images that stick with me are from the Avengers superhero movies. At one point, there's this evil robot named Ultron, and when they show his brain, it's like this big pulsing sphere. And the same thing happens in the Mission Impossible movies with Tom Cruise. In the recent ones, Tom Cruise fights this evil AI, and it's again a pulsing sphere on the screen. When in reality, what I was learning about was even the little brains that they were building were very specific. So it wasn't one brain that did everything, but if you had a robot moving through a room, you'd have little modules that were focused on navigating through the room. You would have another tiny little brain that's focused on recognizing objects and figuring out what's this, and actually guessing, oh, this is a couch, this is a chair, I need to avoid this. So I put this story together, and of course, as used to happen with magazines, despite my findings and what I learned from all these experts, the first thing we see on a cover is a humanoid robot, exactly the kind of thing I said wouldn't happen. Um, but over the years, I stayed in touch with Daniela as I worked on more stories about in this field. And, her vision for robotics is it's so dreamy and optimistic, and it kind of clashes so much with the standard thing we see on in Hollywood movies that we thought it would be really powerful to get her way of thinking out into the world. And so that's where we came up with the idea for this book, The Heart and the Chip. The title kind of says it all in terms of her theory, where she believes that the way forward is to is to prioritize the heart, the human, and what makes us special, and basically use robots and artificial intelligence to make us better at what we already do and to help us with what we already do. So, for example, when she thinks about robots, she looks at her father, her elderly father, working in his garden, and she thinks, how can I give him a vest, right? Or a coat that he could put on that would actually provide a little strength in his arms so that when he's doing his work in the garden or putting in a fence post, he can do it himself. He doesn't have to ask for my help and sort of injure his pride. And he can go out there and do all this work himself. Or she was over in Singapore and she was doing some studies there, and she met a whole bunch of retired people who are in a sort of assisted living facility, and they were being wheeled around into different places to kind of get them out of their rooms and have some social interaction. But what ended up happening was they really had no independence. And so they were in these wheelchairs being wheeled into a room to do some karaoke, but then they were sitting there hot and sweaty and miserable. And so she looked at that and thought, well, what if I could turn these wheelchairs into self-driving cars and they could actually cruise themselves around this facility and get some independence and autonomy back. Or another common one is a lot of times she'll go into factories and industrial areas and look at what people are struggling with and what's hard on their body or their mind, and try and think of how can I come up with a tool to help them. So in one case, she came up with a glove that made a certain drilling task for engineers a little bit easier. Like it absorbed some of the vibrations, so it was less taxing on their wrists and arms. Or in another case, it's something like watching people stack boxes up higher, and getting neck pain and back pain because they had to repeatedly stack things in a warehouse. She came up with a robot that they could use that would basically take some of that pressure off them and do some of that work for them. I was also, I think a lot of what emerges in this book and in talking to her is she's a dreamer, and so when she thinks of robots, it's how can I build robots that are going to give me or people like me superpowers, right? So she worked on one of the first flying drones equipped with video, and what she did was the reason she built it was because she had a scientist friend who was trying to study whales, and he was watching them from this cliff down in South America, and he could only see so much because he had his binoculars. And what she did was she built this drone armed, set up with cameras that could go out and actually track the whales. And so it was kind of like extending his eyes out over the ocean so he could follow them and really understand what they were doing. Then she did the same thing underwater, where she became fascinated in coral reefs, and she loves to scuba dive, and she thought, well, every time you get up close and try and study a fish, it swims away because it's scared. So what if I could build a robotic fish that could swim along with these fish and really study them and watch them as they're, conducting themselves normally? Now, as we explain in the book, these are all the wonderful, dreamy ideas, but there are also, real risks and problems. So, for instance, the drone, a tool for discovery and kind of extending the wonder of the natural world, can also be used as a weapon, right? Right now, drones are being used in the war in the Ukraine. Then we have big issues around availability and cost of these robots. Are they going to be accessible to all people, or are they just going to be sort of toys of the wealthy? Ironically, actually, in this article, at the end of the article, when I wrote this in 2006, I said that the next thing I was going to do was go out and buy a robotic vacuum because they was brand new at that time. It was like, nobody had one. It was so exciting. Now they're everywhere. But I actually didn't because it was too expensive. um, so there's that. And then obviously one of the major things we address in the book, and you always have to think about, is the issue of job loss and job replacement. So are these new technologies, whether it's robotics or AI, are they actually, driving job loss, or are they creating new jobs? Then there's, the problem, especially with AI models, the problems of bias inherent in the data that shows up in the models themselves. And finally, you have a whole bunch of technical challenges that we go into in the book. Actually how to make these things work effectively. Now, I think the book as a whole is, again, it's optimistic, but it's realistic. It talks about these problems and challenges. And I think, for me, it's kind of a way, the way I look at it is it's hopefully going to help people rethink the way, reimagine how they think about robots, and sort of get away from that Hollywood vision of the all-powerful humanoid and the evil robot, and think about robots as very specific intelligent machines, and AI in the same way, that could help you get better at what you already do. One of my favorite examples today is the robotic car. I Every time I go out to San Francisco, I make a point to drive in a Waymo because I think it's just fascinating to be sitting inside a robot with no driver there. But in fact, I think the way more interesting version of that is my dad's car. So my parents are 84 years old, and they just insisted on coming to visit me and my family. My kids had some high school soccer games. They really wanted to see them. And my dad is very stubborn. He wouldn't accept me coming down and driving him up. Now, the complexity here is that he lives on an island and I live on an island, so there's a lot of islands and driving and ferries involved. But as it turns out, he's just gotten this new car. It's not officially a robotic car. We wouldn't think of it as a self-driving car. And yet this car has sensors inside that are going to that basically read when the car comes out of its lane, and then it, pushes the car back into a lane. Or if you don't brake soon enough, right, the radar will read that and it'll start to apply the brakes emergency. Now, a lot of cars have this, but I think what people fail to recognize, and what I get excited about, is that this actually makes them robots. And so these robots are in our lives already, and they're already helping us in sort of subtle and interesting ways. So the book is filled of examples like this. It's really densely packed because Daniela has really just more ideas than anyone I've ever met, and is a phenomenally intelligent person. So, but I guess what I'd like people to take out of the book is, thinking differently about robots and thinking about how we can sort of steer them in such a way to focus on humans and get them to do whatever we can to help humans be better at what we do and empower us in as many ways as possible. Um, that's kind of my quick overview of the book. Thank you so much for having us. This has been super interesting. And I know Janine had a few questions I hope I can help with, but happy to take any other questions from the audience as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. We appreciate your insights. And I'll ask one, and I'm hoping that the chat will just explode like it did before, and we can ask all those questions. But I'll start with one, focusing a little bit on maybe how OTR, orientation, transition, retention professionals can use your book. So The Heart and the Chip, Our Bright Future with Robots. It's a really poignant compilation of history, of current application, and future predictions regarding the collaborations between robots and humans. So what are ways that you believe OTR professionals or folks that work in orientation, transition, and retention can incorporate the book and the knowledge that you have in the book with students and or their colleagues?
That's a great question. So I have to confess first off that I'm a terrible salesperson. But what I will say is that I think this book is about possibilities, both the good and the bad, and the different directions we might take as these technologies become more ever present and more powerful. So I do think it'll be a really valuable read for anyone getting out into the workforce and thinking what they should pursue in the next 10 or 20 years. I really think everyone should be thinking hard about these technologies and trying to understand them, not just robotics, but obviously artificial intelligence is a little bit more, I shouldn't say a little bit more, it's much more of an immediate issue and potentially even threat to work, right? Robots are still a little bit further off depending on your jobs. Like for instance, I have 3 kids. My son is a sophomore in high school, and he's taking a building trades course. And he's a great student. He pays attention in class, does everything right. And so normally I would have said my sort of old school thinking about college, I would have told him to ignore something like that. But I have realized that, well, for one thing, I live on this island called Martha's Vineyard, and I'm surrounded by incredibly uh, incredible construction companies and builders and tradespeople. And so when I'm looking at my son and his passion for building and learning about this and how to, I mean, they're just doing basic things like building sheds right now. And then I think about the work that he's doing and how sort of it's so focused on fine manipulation and, holding a nail and hammering it. These things are still really, really hard for robots. And so when I look at what's interesting him right now and what he likes to do versus what these robots and artificial intelligence tools might be able to do, I'm encouraging him to stay in that lane and pursue this work, because I think it's sort of protected work. I mean, humans are going to be dominating that field for a really, really long time. Versus I have a daughter who's very much interested in knowledge work, and she wants to be in an office and working at a big company. And so for her, I think she's going to have to be working closely with AI tools. And so what I'm trying to get her to focus on is personal skills, person to person, because as Adam said, IRL, he was talking about it in a different context, but that's going to matter sort of just as much for, bumping into people in the office, right? And then also her critical thinking skills, because there are certain things that AI tools are going to do well, and then there are certain things that they're really not going to do well. And so I guess what I'm sort of wandering around with here is that I've got these two different kids that are pursuing different paths, and I think depending on what kids are interested in and thinking about, there are very specific things to focus on based on what these technologies are doing. Is that helpful?
It's very helpful.
Okay,
And
okay.
we have a fun question. Chris asked, hopefully more of a fun question, but based off all of the robots in media and pop culture over the years, what's a favorite of yours that gets something right? And they said mine might be Bender from Futurama, who had one intended purpose, but does significantly more. I love that example.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one. So actually, the what was the questioner's name?
Chris.
All right, Chris. So my favorite is now, it's now come around to being C3PO, and not because C3PO gets, not because it's so perfect or right, because I think it's actually a really good stand-in for artificial intelligence today. So when ChatGPT came out, like everyone else, I was trying to understand what this thing was, and I was going to conferences and talking to people. And I was at this one conference, and there was this guy named Stephen Wolfram, who's this sort of legendary figure in academia, total genius, brilliant guy. I met him once and interviewed him for a story in Popular Science, and it was a very strange and intense hour. But he said, he said what these tools are is they're almost more like telephones, early telephones that allow you to communicate with different technologies and different systems. And so it made me think of C3PO, where, when we first meet him in the Star Wars movies, he's a translation droid, and Luke Skywalker and his uncle, they go to they go droid shopping because one of their machines on their farm is broken. I think it's called a moisture vaporator. And they need a robot that's going to be able to talk to the machine to figure out what's wrong with it, right? And so they buy C3PO not to like have conversations about their inner feelings and stuff, but to actually go talk to their machines so they can fix them. And I think that a lot of these tools that we're working with today, these AI tools and large language models, that's kind of how they function. I mean, they don't have bodies and they don't have funny, accents and all that and personalities, but they're sort of communication interfaces between us and these different tools out there online in the world. So yeah, C3PO.
Okay, thank you. I will never look at C3PO the same way. So, and Ryan writes, thank you for sharing. I'm curious where your inspiration for this subject matter comes from and what role your time as an undergraduate student may have played in this desire.
So my time as an undergraduate student, I didn't take 7 classes like Adam, but almost. I was equally sort of unproductively curious, chasing down anything that was interesting, and so I ended up as a writer and a science writer because I just couldn't bear focusing on one thing, and I wanted to keep learning about as many different ideas as possible. Now, I ended up focusing on robots so much because um, they really, it's neat to have a wild science fiction-y technology like that embodied, and so that you can actually see it move. But it also makes you think about yourself differently and the human body. So I've got this incredible appreciation now for our hands because I've written stories about how hard it is to build a robotic hand. And I've got amazing appreciation for our brain, right? There was at one point I was writing a story about building robotic hands and the challenges of it and blah blah blah. And then I was at a Walgreens and I'm checking out, and this guy is up at the register and he's checking out. He's buying Advil or something like that. But he goes and he removes his wallet, and I looked and I realized he didn't have fingers. So he didn't have hands on either arm, and he didn't have prosthetics either. So what he was doing is he was basically just using what he had, And he managed to pull his wallet out, remove a credit card, and then use both of the ends of his arms to pick up the credit card and hand it to the person. He did everything that I was going to do, and yet he didn't have hands. And it was just, I mean, it was an amazing testament to this guy and his sort of resourcefulness, but it was also an amazing testament to the human brain and how our brain and the software running in there can make do with sort of whatever we give it. So again, it's changed my appreciation for our own sort of human machines and how incredible they are in all their different forms.
We have time for one more question. So Emily had said, thank you for your insights. What does this book suggest about the unique qualities of being human in an increasingly automated world? And how can students nurture those qualities during their college years?
So that's great. And I mean, that's a great question. And it's very much in line with what I'm trying to, teach my own daughter who's in college right now. And um, the heart is irreplaceable, right? The warmth, the emotional connection, you can't do that. So AI, you can't do that with robots or artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence can model empathy, it can fake empathy, um, it can sort of pretend and do what sounds like empathy, but there's nothing like actually being there in front of a person and connecting with them. Um, and so I think focusing on those deep personal connections or even sort of these IRL experiences, focusing on getting up there and speaking in front of a group. And again, critical thinking, the other piece is that, I've been speaking of sort of the emotional and connective piece here, but the other piece that I don't want to downplay is how incredible our brains are and our experiences. So for as good as these robots and AI models are at certain things, we have all taken in so much more information and have such broader, deeper, richer experiences with other people, with the world, with nature, that we've just got more and better data than any of these things, and better brains and better hearts. So I think, you know, again, I'm dancing around a little bit here, but I think that focusing on those deep connections with other people, I think is just going to be absolutely critical.
Thank you so much. And I will say that I enjoyed reading both of the books, and each one had unique things that they brought. But with yours in particular, you had some incredible imagery in it that I really have appreciated as I went through. And my favorite one was the comparison of a robot nanny that was a connection, a combination of Disney's Mary Poppins and Marvel's Iron Man. I'll never look at that the same. So I appreciate that. That was
Very good.
kind of
Thank you.
amusing. So I appreciated the imagery. But we have about a minute left. Do you have one last comment you want to leave with everyone?
Just that I hope everyone tries to understand this stuff, whether you're against it or excited about it. I think we all need to do. I'd like us all to try and do what we can to understand how these things work and sort of because in doing so, it helps you understand what makes humans special and what makes all of us special and unique and powerful. And so, yeah, I would just encourage everyone, and I hope everyone gets out there and learns about it.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Adam and Greg for joining us today. We definitely started this Lunch and Learn series with two relevant and relatable authors. We appreciate your willing to join us today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Joe to round out the program.
I think there we go. Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much, Janine. I am so excited and thrilled that you all could join us today. And thank you for all of those of you who showed up to join us today. If you would like more information about these two authors and maybe about getting them on your campus to speak or getting their books for your program, please feel free to reach out to me at turco055@umn.edu. That's right there on the screen. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and keep your eyes peeled for our next Lunch and Learn in the coming months. Thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a wonderful day.